My name is Liz Dunne. I'm the instruction and reference librarian over at Stroger Library. I'm taking over education-related instruction and research consults for Jeff Phillips, who is our education librarian, but he's actually on leave. He's finishing up some dissertation work. He's going for a PhD in ISLT. So he's taking time to do his studies and things like that. So for the fall semester, if you have any questions, education research related, I'll be the person like fielding those. But after that, it's going to be Jeff Phillips. So get used to both of our faces, I guess. His is quite different. He has a very bushy beard. All right, so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to go over APA 7. We're going to kind of cover the basics of it, and we're also going to go over some of the bigger changes from APA 6 to APA 7. There aren't too many, but there are some noticeable differences, and there actually are like a number of minor changes too that we'll kind of touch on at the end. So if you have a question throughout, feel free, use the chat or raise your hand. I'll kind of try to be mindful of all of that, but we'll also have some time allotted at the end for like a more in-depth Q&A session. So if you have like a meatier question or anything like that, we can go ahead and tackle it there. I'll also absolutely like share this. Yes, I think it is being recorded. And I'll also be totally willing to share these slides with you as well. So don't feel like you need to be like frantically writing everything down because it is APA. So there's like, like italics here, like dot here. Don't worry about it. I'll be willing to share that. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see that okay? Perfect. All right, so I'm gonna pull up my chat as well so I can be mindful of that. Okay, cool. So we're kind of gonna just get right into it. APA 7. All right, so with all citation styles, you have two forms of citations. They're gonna be in-text citations that you need to be making directly preceding your quotes, your paraphrases, right? Kind of paying attribution to those that you're borrowing those ideas from. Then you also have to have that reference page at the end, pretty darn typical. Right, so going over the in-text citations, the basics of this. In-text citations in APA follow the author date method. The date is really, really important, less so in some other styles like MLA, for instance. What this means is if you're directly quoting a work, you'll need to include the author, the last name, the publication year, and the page from which you are quoting. So you use the term P dot for one page and PP dot if the quote spans multiple pages. So that's if you're quoting. If you're paraphrasing work, you actually don't need to include the page number, but I will say that that's highly encouraged, right? Kind of the reason why we have citation styles, why we cite in the way that we do, especially in APA, is to help the reader locate that material. So even though it's not required for paraphrasing, especially if it's like an idea, like a general idea that stretches across a whole work, that's okay. But if there is kind of a page range or a page number where you can identify this is like where I'm specifically borrowing this from, please do include that information, just a good practice. Right, so two ways that you can kind of go about making your in-text citations. One is going to be with a signal phrase. So a signal phrase is kind of when you introduce the work that you're quoting or paraphrasing within the text itself, within that sentence, right? So an example would be, and of course I've got Sailor Moon examples because we have to liven this up somehow for ourselves. But you would have research by Newsom, and the author name is going to be followed directly by the publication year, suggest. So that's my signal phrase, as we'd call it, right? That's how I'm kind of grounding it. I'm introducing the person in the sentence itself. Then I have my quote, and then directly following the quote, I've got that page 10 in parentheticals, right? So that's one way you can do a signal phrase. Similarly, right, Newsom 2004 finds it Sailor Moon quote, and then I've got my PP because that quote spans 2 pages. And then lastly, I have a paraphrase, right, according to Newsom, 2004, and then, right, I have my little paraphrase in that instance, right, I didn't have a page number. So that's how you would go about doing that with that signal phrase. Again, embedding it in the sentence. You can also do it without a signal phrase. So this would just be you kind of like stating your quote, stating your paraphrase, and then at the very end in parentheticals, listing the author, the date, and the page number if it applies. So Sailor Moon is often portrayed crying, which supports the argument that emotions are central to a character. I've just gone ahead and put the paraphrase out there, right? And then I've acknowledged, okay, I'm borrowing this from Newsom, 2004. At the end, you'll see that there are just commas separating the author, the date, and the page number. And again, I've got a quote. So she states, she being Newsom, but I'm not explicitly mentioning her name. Maybe I did in a previous sentence. I've got my quote, and you'll notice that directly after the quote, I have to have all of that information, date, author name, and the page. Even if my sentence goes on, it needs to like directly follow that quote. That's like a common mistake that I see made a lot, is people put it off to the very end. But even if there's more to your sentence after the quote and you're kind of contextualizing it, doesn't matter. That parenthetical citation needs to be right after it. All right, so those are the ways that you can kind of go ahead embedding your quotes in your paraphrase. Really common for works to have more than one author, so we'll talk a little bit about what happens when you have multiple authors and how you go ahead and kind of format those in-text citations. And there are some notable differences here from APA 6 and 7. So if you have two authors, if you were using a signal phrase, right, embedding it in your sentence, it would just be Langford and you're spelling out and, the second author name, the date, and then the rest of your little signal phrase. If it's just going to be that parenthetical citation without the signal phrase at the end, you'll put an ampersand between the authors. So that's the big difference between those. If it's in your sentence, you're going to spell out and then you'll have the ampersand without the signal phrase. That's if you have two authors. If you have 3 to, I think it's 20, basically 3 or more authors, it's a little bit different. So if you have a signal phrase, you're going to say like in say et al. It's going to be that et al. And then you'll go ahead and put your date, put the rest of your signal phrase. Without, it's the same. It's just going to be in say et al. And then your date. Making note that the period comes after the AL and not the ET. So it just goes like that. And this is actually a really big change from APA 6 to APA 7. It used to be in APA 6 that you needed to list all of the author names in the first in-text citation. I see people's eyebrows are like, no. Exactly. So APA 7 really is kind of trying to make it easier for the scholar and for the reader as well. So you do this right from the get-go. You do not have to, in the in-text citation, list all of the author names. That's work that your reference list is going to be doing. So it's actually like a lot more logical. It makes a lot more sense, right? So right from the beginning, if you have 3 or more, use that at all, and it's kind of a lot less work for you. And again, your reference list is where you're going to be listing all the author names. All right, there are instances, right, when you're citing multiple works, especially if you're doing that lit review, right? You kind of want to bolster what you're saying by saying like, yes, this is agreed upon by multiple scholars. So we'll kind of get into a little bit of that. All right, an in-text citation with more than one work. So if you want to cite multiple works in your in-text citation, what you're going to do is place your place those citations in alphabetical order of the first author of the works and separate the citations with semicolons. How you can remember this is you'll look at your reference list and you'll place the authors in that exact order. Right. So for instance, educational psychology is the most researched field involving human learning. And then maybe I want to go ahead and quote multiple people. You'll notice that they're in alphabetical order of the first author, last name. That's a really key thing. I think just as humans, we want to alphabetize like exactly as we see them, but you need to be adhering to write the list of the authors as they're listed on the work itself. So the first author in every paper, that's what you're going to lead with. You won't alphabetize the authors of an individual work, just go with kind of what that work is giving you, if that makes sense. All right. in-text citation, if one work is the most directly relevant, this is really important, right? Sometimes you'll be pulling material where it's just kind of like an offshoot or a smaller idea in a work. But if there's one work that you're citing that is like speaks directly to it, it's kind of like the canonical holy grail for whatever idea it is, you'll definitely want to indicate that. And what you'll do is you'll place the most relevant citation or citations first, again, adhering to that alphabetical order of the first author's last name, and then you'll insert the phrase "see also" and list the other authors. So that'll look like, this is Jeff's example because he's a Lord of the Rings person. So educational psychology does not support learning styles. How I have it set up here, right? So Gandalf is apparently the expert on that. His work is most directly relevant. So we have Gandalf, we have that semicolon, then we have a C also, and we're listing the other authors who are relevant to that as well. So that's how you would go about citing multiple works within one citation. Quoting sources that do not have a page name. Okay, so this is really common if you're citing like electronic works, even if you're citing like some journals. Maybe you can't find the PDF. Maybe it's just going to be embedded on a page, and you wouldn't find right the page numbers for it. So we do have kind of workarounds for that. So if you're quoting something and it doesn't have page numbers, what you'll want to do is provide some other piece of information that's going to help the readers locate that quote. Some examples that you can use, whatever is available: chapter names or numbers, if you have that available but you can't find the page; heading or section names, it's going to be really important for like academic works; paragraph numbers, if it's just a web page, that usually works just fine; tables numbers, verse numbers, if you're looking into biblical works, I think that's how they prefer to have that done. So some examples, we have this first one. So we have the author last name, we have the date of publication, and then we just have a paragraph 6. And I believe paragraph is always P-A-R-A dot. That's how I've commonly seen it kind of represented. And then again, we have another one where instead of listing a paragraph, I'm listing just like the section title of that, the what you can do section. And that's perfectly fine. And if it's like a really lengthy chapter name or a really lengthy section name, I believe you can put like just the first few words of it. That's a pretty common practice as well. Okay, indirect references. This is a good one too, and it's also like a little bit tricky. It's not very obvious. So it's also a little bit discombobulating at first. So if you want to cite a source, like an original primary source that was cited in another source that you're reading, your secondary source that you're looking at, right, that's analyzing that primary source, what you want to do is you'll name the original source author in the text, like if you were using a signal phrase like we talked about earlier. And then you'll list the secondary source in your reference list. And that's also going to be a parenthetical citation. It's going to include the author, the date, and the page number. And again, that's all for the secondary source in that parenthetical citation. It's also going to be preceded by the words "as cited in." So this is what it'll look like. As John Dewey said, right, we're acknowledging that primary source. And then we have the quote, and then it's that parenthetical, it says "as cited in," and that it includes that information for that secondary source. So that's how you would go about formulating that. Honestly though, the best practice is to locate and quote or paraphrase the original source. Right, so if you have the time, instead of kind of using this quote that was in Walks of John Dewey, like try to locate the original John Dewey. That's always the best practice, right? Because then it kind of becomes like a game of scholarly telephone. You kind of want to go to that original source, see what they're saying, kind of get the full context of it. So that's always the best practice. If you can't find that original source, that's okay, and you can kind of rely on this method, but really best practice to go ahead and try to find that original source.
Hey, I had a question real fast, if you don't mind. Last year I was trying to quote somebody who was a guest speaker on a podcast, and I was really unsure. It was them speaking, and they're the ones who I wanted to quote. But all of the citation information I could find on APA seemed to indicate that I should put the as like the reference in my both the in-text citation and at the end that I should be using the host of the podcast versus the guest speaker. And I didn't want it to look like it was a secondary source when in fact it was the author I was quoting. Do you have any advice on how to handle something like that?
I would have to, that's a really good question. And I actually think that there are some new new guidelines for APA 7 for when you're quoting from specific portions of audiovisual material. So that's something to look into. I think your best bet is to go to like Owl Purdue or the APA style guide and see that. Do you remember where you kind of got the information to how to go about quoting a
Yeah,
podcast?
I both searched APA. I did go to Owl, and and basically what I walked away with was the most important thing is that you give in your reference list that somebody is able to easily find and locate that source, and that you should use that as a guide and providing information. For example, maybe I list the person who I want to quote, but in brackets I say that this person is a guest speaker, and then I put also in that reference the name of the host and identify them as host, also bracketed, and provide the podcast information and where I accessed it. And that by doing that in the reference list, I could go ahead and just quote the speaker and the date in text. I still am not sure if I did it right, but I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't publishing, so
Yeah, yeah, that's always like a key question. Like, is this published? Um,
right. I was like, well, it will be good enough for this
yeah.
assignment.
Um, that's really tricky. You might want to do, you actually might want to go ahead and use the as cited in, right? Because you're, I don't know though. That's really, really hard.
I
Th-
should have sent you this question ahead of time, and it's not important that it's, I mean, it was such a weird situation. I'm sure we will all be in something like that at some point, but I should have emailed that ahead of time. Sorry.
No, you're totally fine. And this is really one of those. This is kind of why the librarians are here. Is because there's only like so far you can go with Owl Purdue and even with the APA style blog. You really do kind of. And I would honestly really recommend this if you're working on your PhD especially, and you're going to continually be having to like work out these funny hinks and stuff like that, is really to invest in an APA 7 manual. So the librarians actually do have that, so we can reference that and kind of get it from the direct source and kind of advise you as best as possible. But that all the audiovisual stuff to me is really tricky, and there actually are new guidelines on like how to go about quoting and paraphrasing interviews and things like that. So actually the new method for how you quote interviewees in qualitative research, maybe that actually applies in that instance too, because I think it's the same thing. In your reference list, you just place the original, and then in the in-text, you make a note that it's a participant within that study.
Thank you so much. I feel like that was a good and comprehensive answer. And if I come across something like that again, I'll know what to do. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, the it's also tricky. The citation stuff is really easy going until all of a sudden you get like an interesting source type that kind of throws you through a loop. But anytime you have something like that, yeah, please do contact us so we can kind of like page through our manuals and figure out the best way to go for y'all. Absolutely, that's a good question. All right. So moving on to block quotes. It's definitely better to paraphrase than to use a really lengthy quotation. Obviously, there are some times where you want to capture the exact words of something, right? You might not want to like paraphrase the Emancipation Proclamation. You kind of want to get that full bit there. So if the quotation is 40 words or more, it used to be lines, but now it's 40 words or more, you use a block quote. Formatting that is really interesting. You indent the entire quotation half an inch, you double space it, and you don't put punctuation after the closing parentheses. And you also do not include quotation marks because you're setting it off on that really kind of interesting half-inch indentation. It kind of stands on its own, and it's going to go ahead and look like this. And you'll notice right at the end, I'm actually ending it with a period. I'm ending the quote with a period, which is really, really different from how you typically do that, right? You typically have your punctuation after you have your parenthetical citation. Here's a little bit different. You use your punctuation, and then you plop in the parenthetical at the very end of that. So it's going to look a little offset. You won't use quote marks for that. Okay, listing your sources. So here we're kind of getting into the reference list, which is like the very, very nitty gritty stuff. So in APA, the citations for each source you have in the in-text citation, you need to list those all at the end of your paper. It's going to be a separate page titled references. So kind of some basics of the reference list. You're going to double space the entries and also use hanging indents, which is that ½ inch for the first line and then regular indentation for the rest of it. And there's actually like within Word, there's a hanging indent kind of setting so you can format them really, really easily. Obviously, you need to adhere to the proper citation format for each different source type. So each type of source is a little bit different, and it prioritizes different pieces of information. So you'll kind of need to get the hang of like, okay, this is this source type, this is the citation style that I'm using. Honestly, identifying the source type is the most important part of this because there's tons and tons of online resources for how to do each source type. You just kind of need to get a feel for, okay, this is just a website, this is an online periodical, this is this, this is this. So as long as you're able to decipher the source type, it shouldn't be too tricky to figure out what the proper format is. Like I said earlier, you're going to list your sources in alphabetical order according to the last name of the first author of each work. That's really, really important. For works written by the same author or authors, that happens sometimes, you're going to list them in chronological order from earliest to latest. And there are further guidelines if you have works written by the same author on the same date. There are further guidelines for how you kind of differentiate those. It's pretty simple. You just follow the publication date with like a little A and then a B and then a C and then so forth, right? Again, you can kind of look that up. It's kind of rare, but there are kind of guidelines for like, if this, okay, if this, further, if this, so we got you covered. This is another change from APA 6 to APA 7. You give the last name and the first middle initial for all authors of a particular work up to and including 20 authors. It used to be just until 7. So this actually is a pretty big difference. In APA 7, it makes it a little more rigorous. In APA 6, you used to just list, I believe it was like, if it was 7 or more authors, then you would just use an ellipses, I think, to like fill in and then list the last author name. So it's a little bit different. So if you have up to 20 authors, you need to do the whole thing. There's no cheats on that, which I think that's nice, right? You want to give kind of credit to everybody. So it's a little bit of a change, but kind of rare. All right, for the reference list, how you kind of format the authors, you're going to use a surname followed by the author's initials, right? So for instance, you have Dunne, you're going to put a comma, and then you're going to do the first and the middle initial. Or if you have an author who just has a first name listed, no middle initial, that's fine. You don't need to go hunting for it. You can just do last name and then that first initial, whatever they list on their publication, that's what you should kind of adhere to. If the author's names are hyphenated, maintain that hyphen between the initials, right? We're kind of trying to adhere as closely as possible to their actual given names, right? So we see here, we've still got that hyphen between the first two initials to kind of respect that. Noting though, interestingly, that there is still like a period between them. If they have a suffix like a junior or a third, fourth, whatever, you'll go ahead and include that, just separate it with a comma right there. So you can say JB, comma, junior. And then that'll also be followed by that punctuation, really important. You always need that last final period. You also want to write the surname exactly as it appears, again, trying to respect that. So that includes a hyphenated surname or a two-part surname as well, right? So we've got Santos Garcia's with that hyphen, and we also have just like that two-parter surname as well. Again, being really mindful of kind of adhering to that. Some other notes for the authors. If it's a group author, like an organization or a governmental agency, you just treat that publishing organization like the author name, and you'll list that correspondingly, both in the in-text citation and in the reference list, right? So if you have a source that's just put forth from NASA, you don't see any individual author names, that's fine. You would go ahead and list NASA or whatever other agency it is, just like the author name. That'll be the first thing that you see. If no author name is listed, this is interesting. All you need to do is move the title of the work to the author position. This is kind of a little bit of an update. In APA 6, I think it was acceptable to say anonymous if there wasn't an author name listed. In APA 7, though, we are not using anonymous unless the work is signed as anonymous, which does happen for some online sources, right? That is kind of like a form of authorship in a way, but unless the work is explicitly signed as anonymous, we are not putting that. You'll just go ahead, nix the author name position, and you'll move the title of the work to the author position. I have an example later on, but that's super important to note. Okay, let's get ready. This is like the really, really kind of nitty gritty bit. And I'm going to kind of glance over a little bit of this. Again, this is information that is kind of everywhere on our Purdue, on APA style blog, but it is good to know the differences, I think, between some of these formats. So for a basic book, you've got the author, you've got the year of publication, title of the work, capital also for the subtitle, and then the publisher. So it looks something like this. It's pretty darn simple for just basic book. They're not looking for too much information. If you have an addition other than the first, this is when it kind of starts to branch off a little bit. It's going to be almost exactly the same, except you'll notice that after the title of the work in parentheticals, not italicized, interestingly enough, I have the addition, and it's almost always formatted like that. It'll be like a fourth with the number and then the th, whatever ending it is, and then ed, with a period, and then the rest of the bit. So just that very slight kind of variation on that, just including the addition right after the title of the work. So this is true, this little note is true for all different source types. Only the first word in the title and or the subtitle is going to be capitalized, or proper nouns that will also be capitalized in the first word after a colon or dash in the title. This is really specific to APA. We don't use title case, right? We use this kind of interesting way. So that is something that you definitely have to get used to with APA. And a lot of the times, actually, I'll find that that is like, if I'm using like built-in citation features in a database, or even sometimes if I'm using like a citation management tool, even like Zotero or something like that, every once in a while it'll get that wrong, and I'll have to go in and actually clean up the title of the work. So that's just something to be really mindful of, and honestly something that just comes from like habit of making these citations. Another big update from APA 6 to APA 7, you no longer have to include the publisher location after the publisher name. Again, just making it like a lot easier for you. You used to have to put, I believe, the state and then the city where the publisher was located, and that actually got really tricky when the publisher had like multiple locations and things like that. So they're just kind of making your life a whole lot easier, but that is a pretty big change from APA 6 to APA 7. They require a lot less info. All right, continuing with books. So we've got the edited book again. It's pretty much the same darn thing as the book, except you'll notice that with the author names, I just want to clarify, right, that these are the editors. So right after the last author name, you'll see I'll go ahead and have the EDS period. to indicate these are the editors, and then I continue on with the citation. Just very minor change. Chapter in an edited book. So this is where things kind of get a little bit different for the book format. All right, so you will list the author names of the title of the chapter that you're looking to quote, right? And then you push the editors off. So it'll go authors of the chapter, the year that that was published, and then it'll do the title of the chapter, not in italics, interestingly enough. And then it'll say in, and then you'll list the editors, followed by the EDS, and then the title of the edited book that it's contained within. Right, so this is where we're kind of getting a little bit more complicated. The title of the book is going to be in italics, and then right after the title of the edited book that the chapter is within, you'll see that it has edition, volume, or page range, depending on what is available. If it is a specific edition of that, like please do include that, or if it's a volume of like a series of books, you'll also put that, or the page range, and then the publisher name. So again, this is where we're kind of branching into a little more complicated, right? So I have an example, right? So like we talked about, boom, 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 author name of the chapter, chapter name, in those editors' book, right? Title of the book. And then in this case, there was no edition or volume. So I just put the page range, and then I've got the publisher name. And again, important to note, the names of journals and books are italicized. The larger kind of containing material is going to be italicized, but the article title or book chapter title are not going to be italicized. So we only italicize like the larger work, if that makes sense. Okay, so electronic resources, a little bit different, a little bit different. So we've got the basic online periodical. This is kind of like the rubric, the template for a lot of the material that you're going to be seeing, right? So you've got the author, year, same deal as the book, title of the article, right? Again, no italics, being mindful of the sentence case that we're using. You have the title of the periodical, that'll be in italics like we talked about, that larger containing work. Volume number, which is also in italics. Issue number, no italics, kind of funky format. And then you'll have your pages, the page range, and then you have either the URL or the DOI if it's applicable. So that's what that is going to look like. Again, this will be really familiar after a while. So for an article in a database, okay, so super important to note. If an article from a library database, right, say you access it through the libraries, if it's easily located elsewhere, like it's not exclusive to that one database, you actually are not required to provide database information like a DOI or a URL. So that's, I just kind of want to like get that out there. If you can easily find the DOI, that's awesome. You can go ahead and include it. It does kind of help with being able to locate it. But if you don't see a DOI located, like you do not have to put like the really long URL or permalink that you find. That's completely acceptable, unless of course your professor, your teacher is like requiring it. Then go ahead and throw out everything I'm telling you and do what they kind of want to do, right? So that's always important to note. If it helps them locate it, that's completely fine, but you're actually not required to include that information. It'll actually just look like what it would look like in print, right? So without a DOI, here we have this example here. With a DOI, it'll go ahead and just be the DOI kind of link at the end. So we do have some notes for this. Retain any non-standard capitalization or punctuation in the academic journal title. So this is really interesting too. So exactly how you see it. If they have crazy like hyphenations, if they have like atypical grammar, something like that, or they have like a uppercase, lowercase, whatever, exactly as you see it. exactly as you see it. That's really important to note. So the title of the periodical actually does not adhere to the same rules as the title of the article where you're only capitalizing the first letter. So that's a really good kind of thing to know. APA 7 update from 6. The label DOI colon, that used to be like the common thing to do with the DOI is you would just say DOI colon and then you just list that like number letter string and it wouldn't be like a hyperlink or anything. We're nixing that. Both DOIs and URLs should be presented as hyperlinks. They should always begin with the HTTP colon slash, right? It should always adhere to that format. That is kind of a big change from 6 to 7. We're just making it easier for people to click the hyperlink and go right to it. And this is also a change kind of corresponding to that. There are going to be no periods following the DOIs or URLs, right? It's just going to be DOI, URL, boom. So no kind of closing punctuation, which is really interesting for anything APA. We're usually very, like looking for the end period. All right, a few more electronic sources, a newspaper article you found online, author for newspaper articles, you're gonna do for the publication date, the year and the month day, so a little more information. The title of the article, the title of the newspaper, noting that it's the same deal as that kind of academic scholarly article found in a database. The title of the newspaper is gonna be exactly how they present it and then the URL. So you've got an example there. Non-periodical web document or report, pretty similar. So you got your authors, your date of publication. If you can't find like a very specific year, month, day, that's fine. You can just put in the general year, but if you want to get more specific and you're able to, you absolutely can, right? Author, date, title of the document, right? Noting that the caps, I'm only capitalizing, oh, his name is George, the snail. And then Hawaiian because that is a proper noun, but everything else is lowercase. I'm saying it's from NPR, and then I've got the URL. Web page on a website with a retrieval date. This is pretty interesting, right? So it'll just be pretty much the same exact deal as what we just saw, except I'm including the retrieval date at the very end. I'm saying I retrieved this on this specific date from, oh, bless you. Bless you again.
Oh.
All right, so we're putting the retrieve from, the date that I'm retrieving it, and then from, and then the URL. So if you can't find, I included this example, I just want to note, if you can't find the date of publication, this isn't an instance where you're going to just omit that material. You're going to say n.d. Again, it's kind of really, really important to note that. You're going to just put that after the author's last name. Again, if you can't locate the date of publication, just use that nd, no date, after the author name. And you'll also do that for your in-text citations too. So you'll only really want to include a retrieval date if the site is likely to change. So this probably isn't a good, right? The government information, the government information we hope would still be there and archived in a good way. But this is really important to note if it's like a random blog or something like that, or a website you think is kind of likely to change, or especially if it's like a link to like something in a Google Drive or something like that that you're not kind of the owner of, you can put that retrieved by date, but it's not necessary. And this is actually an update for APA 7. You only include the phrase retrieved from before the URL or the DOI when the citation has a retrieval date. It used to be that you would always include that whether or not you had the retrieval date. So only if you've deemed it necessary that it has a retrieval date will you put retrieve from. All right, and I think this is the last bit for the electronic resources. So if you have a report by a government agency or another organization, the format is really simple for this one. Org name, publication year, title of the report, just italics, right? The lowercase that we've been talking about, and a URL, really simple. Right, so you see like United States Government Accountability Office, boom, boom, boom. All right, we also have online lecture notes and presentation slides. I always get questions about how to kind of format these. pretty darn simple. You'll just do, again, the author name, year, month, date, if you can find all that information, or the publication date, just year, if that's what you can find. You'll do the title of the presentation, again, italics, adhering to that kind of font or sentence case. And then you'll indicate what the format of that is, if that makes sense, in brackets. This is another little interesting trick. So if it's lecture notes, you'll say that. If it's PowerPoint slides, that, right? A PDF, whatever it is, you'll kind of indicate that. And then you'll put the publisher and the URL. Well, the publisher is interesting. I think that might actually be a typo. Yeah, so it would look like this. But here I am demonstrating, right, note that if I couldn't find the author name, which is kind of common a lot of the times for like lecture notes or PowerPoint slides that you might be finding, what you would do is you would just scoot the title of the presentation up into that author position, and you would lead with that, and that is actually what you would include also in your in-text citation as well. So that title of the work would be replacing the author name, then you would have the date, and then right, the page, if that applies in this instance.
Liz, does this also count for conference presentations, or is that its own category?
Conference is its own category. That's an excellent question, though. For everything that kind of deviates from the typical online periodical, you'll need to definitely look into those. It's its own section in OWL Purdue. I think it might be under electronic resources. You'll find it in there, and then you'll also find a lot of stuff in the additional resources. I think that is like the thing. But yeah, never assume that you can kind of carry over things like that. That is a great point. I'm glad you brought it up. So online lecture notes, presentation slides, different from conference proceedings, and I think there's actually like a little difference between within conference proceedings as well. So you'll definitely want to look into all those different source types. Great question. Thank you. All right.
In text on that, do you just put the year for the date, or do you have to put the month and day as well?
I think the year for the date would be fine for that. That's something I should actually look into, though. I'm not sure. That would be kind of like a clunky in-text citation. I think you can just go with the year, but that's something to look into that I can follow up with and include in this when I share it with you.
And would slide number also replace page number, or is that not needed?
That's a good question. Based off of what they have as criteria for when there's no page number, I think you could say something like slide number and then list that. Especially if you're direct quoting, you will kind of want to identify exactly where within that presentation you are retrieving the material from. These are good questions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right. And again, right, note if you can't find any author info, just begin with the title of that work. All right, so we're kind of at the close. So other differences between APA 6 and APA 7, I kind of had them sprinkled throughout, all the big ones, but just some more to mention. So student papers no longer use a running head, which is great. That was always really annoying to me that I had to do that. So if you are not publishing the paper, you do not need to have that. There's also a lot more flexibility with font choices, interestingly enough. This is for accessibility purposes, actually. So there's a little more wiggle room as long as the font is used consistently and you're not having like a different font on every page and getting really loosey-goosey. So whatever font it is that you like, at least in student papers, it might be different if you're looking to publish, right? Obviously, every journal has very like specific requirements that you'll need to look into before submitting work. But for this, you'll go ahead, choose a font, stick with it, and you should be good. importantly, you'll use a singular they or their when a person's gender is either unknown or if they have stated that they use they, their, them as their pronouns. So kind of just this push towards a more inclusive language, which is really great. Okay, so for more info on the minor changes, definitely refer to Purdue OWL. They have changes in 7th edition. That's its own page on the APA 7 page, or I should say its own section, and it's really pretty thorough. We also, at the libraries, we have an APA 7 research guide, or like a portion of a research guide that I have linked here. Again, I'll kind of get you this information, but please do refer to those for some more minor changes. Which include differences in heading levels. There is a little bit of a change there, just in levels, I think 3, 4, 5, but still noticeable difference. There's a lot more on using bias-free language, which again is like an awesome step in the right direction that they're trying to push for. So definitely be mindful of that. A little bit of a difference on tables and figures, and I believe how they're being labeled and titled. And there's a little bit on style mechanics. Not really huge changes, but just some minor ones that you will want to be aware of. Another one that I think I referenced earlier that'll be super important, if you're doing qualitative research, there is quite a difference in how you will quote interviewees. So that is something to be mindful of too. That's all I got though. Wow, we did it. We made it through. APA is always a little dry. But yeah, that's kind of the basics. Do we have any questions? Okay. I'm around if you have any questions. Please do feel free to email me. That would be the best way to kind of get your answers. Do you still need the running head for the dissertation? Oh, sorry, that was to me privately. I'm so sorry. I'm not sure that if that was meant to. I don't think that you do need it for the dissertation. If you're in, right, it's not going to be published, so I don't think so. That's definitely one of those kind of like small details that you'll want to run with your major professor and your advisors with, though.
Liz, thank you so much for your time today. I really feel like that was succinct, and we know what to do if we aren't sure how to reach out. And it's been frightening for all of us to live without Jeff, and now I feel much more comfortable knowing that we're in good hands. I also wanted to let everybody know that Darren just dropped a link to the Zoom meeting that's happening at noon in the chat, and that's a Tuesday talk. So a surprise faculty member will be hosting a casual virtual meeting on Tuesdays. This is the link that'll happen for ours, which is today at noon. And that's it. Like, Liz, thank you so much.
Yeah, oh my gosh, it's my pleasure. It's also scary for me to live without Jeff. He was my boss for a really long time. So I'm like, Jeff, no. But yeah, I'm always around, and really this is one of those things where like you'll kind of develop those very specific questions that we'll be able to work with you with. And I think next week I'll be here to talk about citation management tools. So it kind of all ties into this, but that'll be a fun time.
Very nice.
All right, y'all, bye.
Thanks, guys.